Welcome into the Fantasy Football Fellas YouTube channel. My name is Tyler Plath, and today we are going through the 10 players that you need to be looking out for or adding from the waiver wire after the first week of the regular season. Look, week one is never a certainty for fantasy managers because there is nothing that is ever certain from one year to another. And it's perfectly summed up in a tweet by Andy Holloway from the Fantasy Footballers, where he tweeted right before the noon kickoff, where he said, week one is one of the most difficult weeks in all of fantasy football. Tons of personnel turnover, there's coaching changes, there's depth chart dances, and there's just tons of unknowns. Start your studs, you don't get fancy with it, and you learn and observe. And then from there, you adjust, you optimize, you target, and you maneuver. So don't overreact by dumping guys like Drake London, T. Higgins, or Dallas Goedert after their, let's admit it, disappointing performances. But don't dump those guys or really any other stud that didn't perform as well as you thought they should for chump change. That is not the time to do it. Not after the first week. That being said, though, you do have to optimize your squad. And you do that by diving into the waiver wire and picking up guys who may have a bigger role or produce better than people expected them to. Like our first guy, Tyler Allgeier. Okay, now it was always going to be a possibility that Tyler Allgeier would have more of a role than people expected. And that sure looks like to be the case after week one, where he finished with 75 rushing yards on 15 carries with 2 rushing touchdowns along with 3 receptions. And look, it's relatively simple in the analysis for Tyler Allgeier. He's not going to score multiple touchdowns every week. And there's a possibility that Bijan steals some of those carries, some of those snaps more and more week by week because he's still going to get snaps, right? That is just how Arthur Smith has built this offense. That's what we've learned from week one. And in this run game that Arthur Smith has built up with the Falcons, Tyler Allgeier is going to be productive with whatever kind of carries he gets. You're not going to add Tyler Allgeier to put into your lineup right away unless he proves it again in week 2 that he deserves to be in your lineup. But at this point, you're adding him onto your bench as a handcuff if you have a Bijan Robinson, or you are just adding him as just a valuable piece that you can use in a trade later on in the season. Like I said, not too much analysis when it comes to Tyler Allgeier because it is relatively straightforward. So we move on to our next guy, who is Romeo Doubs. And now, before I say anything else, Romeo Doubs will likely revert to his wide receiver 2 role in the Packers offense because Christian Watson was out against the Bears. But all that does is it puts Romeo Doubs in this stash category, that he's one of those players that you just add onto your bench just to see what happens in week 2 and week 3, right? He did go for 4 receptions on 5 targets, only for 26 yards, but he had 2 touchdowns. And it's not a huge stat line, obviously, but what matters is that Doubs was looked at in the red zone. And the other takeaway off of that is those touchdowns showed that the Packers show a lot of trust and have a lot of confidence in Jordan Love in the red zone, which was a big question mark for the fantasy community all offseason long. And Jordan Love finished with 3 passing touchdowns total in this game, and 2 of them obviously went to Romeo Doubs. You can expect this Packers offense to be relatively more productive than people suspected them to be in the offseason. And that's a good thing for Romeo Doubs. The more productive this offense is, the more productive Romeo Doubs will be. So adding him as a stash onto your bench as a nice little depth piece, maybe your 4th, 5th option on your bench in terms of wide receivers. 4th is a little rich, I would say. But at least having him on your bench gives you more options. And if he proves it again in week 2 and week 3, he's then solidified into your squad and can maybe even roll into some flex territory on bye weeks and stuff like that. Puka Nacua is next, and what a week for my guy Puka Nacua. 10 receptions on 15 targets for $119 against the Seahawks. Let's go. Oh, it was so good to watch. And this one the analysis, I should say, is really simple, just like it was for Tyler Allgeier. Stafford is going to rely on Puka Nacua in Cooper Kupp's absence. And you look at the other receivers in their performances in week 1 on the Rams, right? Tutu Atwell, he had a pretty solid week, but if we're going to compare Puka and Tutu Atwell, I think Puka is going to be the guy that has better production over the longevity of 3 weeks versus Tutu Atwell. Van Jefferson was pretty uninspiring, and Tyler Higbee underwhelmed, majorly underwhelmed. So Puka is absolutely worth adding in Cooper Kupp's absence, right? And we know that Cooper Kupp is gone for at least 4 games, could be longer. We can't necessarily expect 10 receptions, a $119 in yardage, 15 targets every single week from Puka. Like, that's just Madden numbers, honestly. But the role as the guy that Matthew Stafford trusts the most is valuable. Did you know that Kenneth Gainwell was going to be the lead back for the Eagles in the first game of the year? Yeah, I didn't think so, because I don't think many people did, and it was one of the most confusing things that happened on Sunday. Yes, the Eagles went out and traded for DeAndre Swift, went out and signed Rashad Penny, and you figured that it was going to be between those two to be the lead back. Wrong. Rashad Penny was a healthy scratch. DeAndre Swift had 2-3 touches at most. Everything else went to Kenneth Gainwell. Yes, I know Boston Scott had like a carry and a reception or something like that, but everything else went to Kenneth Gainwell. He had 54 rushing yards on 14 carries with 4 receptions. The lead back. Okay. Now, let me be honest. I sort of get Clyde Edwards-Helaire vibes with Kenneth Gainwell, where we'll see it for a couple more weeks where Kenneth Gainwell is the lead back, and people are going to say, well, it's time to acknowledge Kenneth Gainwell as the RB1 on the Eagles, and then all of a sudden, it would not surprise me at all if we see a sharp decline in usage or snaps for Kenneth Gainwell, because, again, I name dropped them earlier. DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny are still in this backfield. So, for right now, it's still worth adding, because you let the hype build over the next 2 weeks, right, where people, more and more people, I should say, buy into the narrative that Kenneth Gainwell is the running back 1. Imagine who you could go buy. Speaking of shocking running backs, Kyren Williams, 15 carries and 2 touchdowns. What? Where did that come from? That was not on my bingo card. And if you say it was on yours, you're lying. This came out of nowhere. Okay, and there was some training camp buzz that the Rams wanted to get Williams more involved in the offense. Guess that's true. Again, 15 carries for 52 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. I mean, yes, Cam Akers, you look at the stat line, Cam Akers still got 22 carries, but here's the thing. 11 of those carries came on the last 2 drives of the game when they were already up 2 scores. And Cam Akers was horribly efficient. He had horrible efficiency with those carries. Again, 22 carries, he had 29 rushing yards. Like, not good at all. At all. So, look, this will likely be a split backfield. But if you have Cam Akers, you need to go add Kyren Williams. Because there's now all of a sudden a reality where Akers doesn't get all the work like some people thought he was going to get. And having Kyren Williams as a handcuff on your squad just gives you some reassurance, and I should say it like this. Gives you some insurance that you don't need to fully rely on Cam Akers, that you've got the backup option. But as I said at the beginning, this was completely out of left field. I don't think anyone saw this happening. And again, I should also say this too. There's the possibility that this is a facade as well. But for the meantime, if you are Cam Akers' manager, you need to go get Kyren Williams to make sure that you have at least one of the 2 realities of Cam Akers getting the full work again, or the work going to Kyren Williams. Let's talk about the Patriots wide receiver 1. Kendrick Bourne. Yeah, Kendrick Bourne. The Patriots wide receiver 1. I'm obviously kidding. But can we be serious for a second here? Kendrick Bourne may be Mac Jones's favorite target this year, just based on what we saw in week 1. And that could be an overreaction, and sure. But look, 6 receptions, 11 targets for 64 yards and 2 touchdowns. Just for context, the Patriots threw the ball 54 times, which was, I don't think anyone really expected. Granted, it's tough to run against the Eagles' defense, so maybe it really wasn't that shocking that they threw the ball that much. Again, 54 pass attempts, 11 targets for Kendrick Bourne. That means a 20% target share. That's worth keeping tabs on. Now the Patriots do have a tough stretch of games where they've got Miami, then they've got the Jets. Then I'm pretty sure they followed up with Dallas. I'm pretty sure that's the third game down the road. So the Patriots may actually keep throwing the ball a lot because I don't expect them to really be ahead in any of those games. And so to stay in the game, they're going to have to throw the ball. The other thing worth noting is that Devontae Parker was out for this game. Tyquan Thornton was put on IR before the game. So he's out at least 4 games. So Devontae Parker was out. So we'll have to see what that looks like when Devontae Parker comes back into the fold. So I completely understand if you'd want to wait one more week, but in my opinion, may need to capitalize now, especially in deeper leagues, because like I said, finding a player with a 20% target share on the waiver wire is pretty rare. And like I said, if the Patriots keep throwing the ball a lot because they're going to be down in their games against the Jets, the Dolphins, and the Cowboys, that could mean good things for Kendrick Bourne. Now on to our next player, Jaylen Warren, who might be one of the more uninspiring guys on this list based on week 1 performances, but he's got to find a way onto your squad, especially if you have Najee Harris. It was always going to be tough running against the 49ers defense, and the Steelers didn't even really try to run it against them. They only had 9 carries between all their running backs. Now, Najee did post a better yards per carry, and if I'm not mistaken, it was like 6 carries for like 31 yards, something like that. But you don't get points for yards per carry. What you do get points for is receiving work, and Jaylen Warren got that over Najee. Warren had 5 receptions and targets compared to Najee's 2. So this backfield is going to continue splitting work where Najee's going to get the majority of the ground game. But Warren is likely going to get the majority of the receiving work between the two of them, I should say. And in the world that Jaylen Warren gets more and more carries by the week, that's going to impact Najee. So having the handcuff and having the insurance on your bench is only going to help you out. A couple more guys here. First with Zay Jones, who was 2nd in targets for the Jaguars in week 1. He had a great catch in the end zone, so props to him. But that won't happen every week. But the takeaway is that Zay Jones definitely still has a role in this offense. And that was questioned with Calvin Ridley's arrival. And like I said, he still has a role just based off this first game. Now, you're not going to play Zay Jones in your lineup, but if you're a Christian Kirk manager, you should consider adding Zay Jones in case we see a fall off of Christian Kirk, because Christian Kirk only had 1 catch for 9 yards, if I'm not mistaken, and only like 3 targets. So if we're going to see a deduction in Christian Kirk's role, it's likely going to go to Zay Jones then. Having the Zay Jones aspect on your bench just gives you some kind of reassurance, because after what we saw in week 1, not going to say it's time to panic, but only 1 catch for 9 yards in the first week of the season is not a very good showing. We have a tight end ad for our waiver wire video. That tight end is Hayden Hurst. Now, I don't recommend, if you're going to take any kind of advice from me in this video, hear me say this. don't hold on to 2 tight ends unless you have to, right? Like, if you've got a Travis Kelce whose status is going to be unknown throughout most of this upcoming week, possibly same with a guy like Mark Andrews, then it's kind of worth having 2 tight ends on because you just don't know what's going to happen with the stud. But like I said, if you have to, Hayden Hurst is the guy that you should be adding. The wide receivers for the Panthers struggled mightily. They did not play good at all. And Bryce Young needs to throw the ball to somebody. And that leaves your tight end, Hayden Hurst. And this isn't a one-off by any means. Like, there's historical evidence that shows that rookie quarterbacks target tight ends often, because it usually also means the wide receiver room is not very good. And you look at the wide receiver room in week 1 for the Panthers, it was a 32-year-old Adam Thielen, 32, maybe 33. Don't matter. Adam Thielen, rookie Jonathan Mingo, and then a rotation between Terrace Marshall, Laviska Shenault, and one other player, possibly. I don't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, not great. Hayden Hurst had to kind of step up, and he did. He saw 5 receptions, 7 targets for 41 yards and a touchdown. And that's the kind of production that you want to see out of a tight end, out of some kind of a streamer option, if that's what we want to call it, as a streamer option. That's who you should be looking for. So, like I said, Hayden Hurst is our tight end ad for week 1, week 2, whatever we want to call it. But, you know, if you look at other tight ends, Hunter Henry is a good shout too. Our vote is Hayden Hurst, though, again, because there's no one else really there competing for targets that poses a big enough threat to a guy like Hayden Hurst. Last guy on this list is Josh Reynolds, who stepped up as the wide receiver 2 for the Lions, as he posted 4 receptions on 7 targets for 80 yards. It's worth mentioning, though, that literally 40% of his total fantasy points came from just one play. So the stat line isn't super sticky by any means. But like I said, the wide receiver 2 for the Lions offense has some stash value to it. Because this Lions offense, even though it didn't show a week 1, it's going to get better. And based on what we had seen from last year, the Lions offense is highly efficient and pretty prolific. Like, they can put up points in a hurry. So, like I said, the wide receiver 2 in this offense can pay some dividends. You know, Jameson Williams comes back in now 5 weeks, so we'll see what things look like then. But for the next 5 weeks, you could have the wide receiver 2 for the Detroit Lions. That'll wrap things up here for our first waiver wire video of the 2023 regular season. Here are some quick hitter honorable mentions that just missed our list. Jacoby Myers is our first honorable mention. He had 2 touchdowns, but he's probably going to miss next week because of a concussion that he picked up. Our second honorable mention, Roschon Johnson, who had a rushing touchdown and 6 receptions. Hello. Which made him the leading fantasy back on the Bears. Probably need to see another week of that to see if that's going to be a thing. And the third honorable mention is Joshua Kelly, and he quietly had 16 carries for 91 yards and a touchdown. It was a pretty high-scoring game, and it was a shootout pretty much until the last drive of the game. So we'll have to see what his production looks like in a more normal game. Thanks for tuning in. Give this video a like, hit subscribe. Make sure that you click that bell also so you know when we are posting. We are posting videos like this in the shorter content on Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays. And then we've got longer podcast shows that go much more in depth on things. And then we've got our minute-long videos that we're posting every day as well. We are posting every day. And on the podcast or videos like this or minute-long videos that help interpret information to help you win your leagues and to get better throughout the year, because that's ultimately what we are here to do, is to get better and win our leagues by the end of the year. So, like I said, give this video a like, hit subscribe, and click that bell to be notified whenever we post. much appreciated. So thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you in the next video.